Welcome to Coral Cove, a tropical paradise where golden sands hide deadly secrets. When Miss Jane Marple arrives for a quiet holiday, a cryptic note beware, the one who paints with lies plunges her into a web of smuggling, betrayal, and hidden pasts. Who's behind the forged passports? What's the truth behind the coiled snake symbol? And will she unravel the island's mysteries before the tide turns deadly? Dive into Miss Marple's sunny beach murder hunt, where every clue sparks a question and every sunset holds a secret. Chapter 1. The Arrival at Coral Cove. The steamer's horn blared as it docked at Coral Cove, a jewel of an island where turquoise waves kissed golden sands under a relentless tropical sun. Miss Jane Marple, her straw hat tilted against the glare, stepped onto the wooden pier with the cautious grace of a woman who had seen more of life's shadows than its sunshine. She had been invited by her old friend, Lady Beatrice Harrow, for what was promised to be a restful holiday at the Coral Cove Resort, a haven for the wealthy and the curious. Yet, as the salty breeze tugged at her shawl, Miss Marple's sharp eyes scanned the bustling dock, sensing that rest might elude her. Porters scurried about, hauling wicker trunks and leather suitcases, while gulls wheeled overhead, their cries mingling with the chatter of arriving guests. Miss Marple adjusted her gloves, her mind already cataloguing the scene. A young woman in a peacock blue sarong laughing too loudly. A man in a linen suit wiping sweat from his brow with a handkerchief, and a group of locals selling conch shells polished to a gleam. The air carried the scent of frangipani and ambition, a combination Miss Marple found as intriguing as it was familiar. Lady Beatrice awaited her at the end of the pier, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, her smile as warm as the island itself. "Jane, darling," she called, embracing her friend with a rustle of silk. "You've no idea how delighted I am you're here. This place is a circus, and I need your sensible head to keep me grounded." Miss Marple returned the smile, her eyes crinkling. "Beatrice, you've always thrived in a circus, but I'll do my best to keep up." They climbed into a horse-drawn cart adorned with hibiscus flowers, which trundled them toward the resort. The path wound through palm groves, where parrots flashed emerald and crimson against the foliage. Beatrice chattered about the island's charms, its coral reefs, its nightly dances, but Miss Marple's attention drifted to the other passengers sharing their ride. There was Mr. Percival Wren, a retired colonel with a bristling mustache and a habit of barking orders at the driver. Miss Celeste Duval, a young heiress whose sapphire earrings caught the light like tiny beacons, and Diego Salazar, an artist whose paint-stained fingers clutched a sketchbook as if it were a lifeline. Each, Miss Marple noted, seemed to carry a private weight beneath their holiday cheer. The Coral Cove Resort loomed ahead, a sprawling colonial structure with whitewashed walls and verandas draped in bougainvillea. Its grandeur was softened by the island's wild beauty, as if nature and opulence had struck a delicate truce. As they disembarked, a bellhop in a crisp uniform ushered them into a lobby cooled by lazily spinning fans. Miss Marple's room, on the second floor, overlooked the beach, where waves whispered secrets to the shore. She unpacked her modest suitcase, placing her knitting needles and a worn copy of Pride and Prejudice on the bedside table. But it was a small, folded note slipped under her door that caught her attention. She opened it, her fingers steady despite the prickle of curiosity. In neat, slanted handwriting, it read, "Beware the one who paints with lies." No signature, no explanation. Miss Marple tucked the note into her pocket, her mind already turning over its implications. A prank, perhaps, or something more sinister. She resolved to keep her eyes open, for in her experience, such messages were rarely without purpose. That evening, the resort hosted a welcome dinner on the beach, where lanterns swayed in the breeze and a steel drum band played a lilting melody. Miss Marple, dressed in a simple lavender frock, took her seat at a long table adorned with seashell centerpieces. Beatrice, resplendent in emerald silk, introduced her to the other guests. Colonel Wren, his face ruddy from the sun, or perhaps the rum punch, regaled the table with tales of his campaigns in Burma, though his eyes darted nervously when questioned about his retirement. Miss Duval, her laugh like champagne bubbles, spoke of her travels across Europe, but her fingers toyed with her earrings as if anchoring herself to the present. Mr. Salazar, the artist, was quieter, sketching idly on a napkin, his dark eyes flitting between his fellow guests. As the meal progressed, grilled snapper with mango salsa, followed by coconut sorbemis. Marple listened more than she spoke, her gentle questions drawing out fragments of truth. She learned that Colonel Wren had arrived unexpectedly, claiming a last-minute booking, that Miss Duval had a habit of vanishing for hours during the day, and that Mr. Salazar's paintings, displayed in the resort's gallery, had drawn both admiration and whispers of controversy. "They say he paints what he shouldn't," Beatrice murmured, leaning close. "Scenes that don't belong to him." Miss Marple nodded, her mind filing away the comment. She glanced at Mr. Salazar, who was now arguing with Miss Duval across the table. Their voices, though low, carried a sharp edge. "You've no right to judge my work," Salazar said, his accent thick with indignation. "You know nothing of art, only of money." Miss Duval's smile was cold. "And you know nothing of discretion, Diego. Keep your brushes to yourself, or you'll regret it." The exchange ended abruptly when Miss Duval rose, excusing herself. To the powder room, Salazar slammed his napkin onto the table and stalked toward the bar, where he ordered a drink with a trembling hand. The other guests pretended not to notice, but Miss Marple's knitting needles clicked steadily, her calm demeanor masking the quick calculations in her mind. The notes warning paints with Lisbecode, and she wondered if Miss Duval's threat held more weight than mere words. After dinner, as guests drifted to the dance floor or the moonlit shore, Miss Marple lingered by the bar, sipping a ginger tea. The bartender, a wiry man named Leo with a quick grin, polished glasses and shared tidbits of gossip. "That's Salazar," he said, lowering his voice. "He's got talent, but he's trouble. Painted a mural last month that had the owner in. If it's something about a local legend he shouldn't have touched." Miss Marple tilted her head. "And Miss Duval, she seems particular." Leo chuckled. "Oh, she's got secrets, that one. Always asking about the old shipwreck off the. Reeve says it's for a book she's writing, but I don't buy it." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the cabanas. Miss Marple turned to see Miss Duval storming across the sand, her heels sinking with each furious step. Behind her, Salazar stood by a palm tree, his face pale. "You'll pay for that," Miss Duval shouted, her voice carrying over the music. She disappeared into the resort, slamming a glass door behind her. Salazar lingered a moment, then vanished into the shadows. Miss Marple excused herself from Leo and strolled toward the cabanas, her pace unhurried but purposeful. The sand was cool under her sensible shoes, and the lanterns cast flickering patterns. On the ground, near the palm tree where Salazar had stood, she found a crumpled, sketchier woman's face, unmistakably Miss Duval's, but with eyes that seemed to accuse rather than allure. Miss Marple smoothed the paper and slipped it into her handbag, her lips pursed. Returning to her room, she sat by the open window, the ocean's rhythm soothing her thoughts. The note, the argument, the sketch hall were threads in a tapestry she couldn't yet see. But Miss Marple was patient. She had unravelled knottier mysteries than this, in villages far less glamorous than Coral Cove. For now, she was content to observe, to let the island's secrets reveal themselves in their own time. As she prepared for bed, she glanced at the sketch once more. The hostility in Miss Duval's drawn eyes was unmistakable, but so was the fear in Salazar's hurried lines. Whatever lay between them was no mere spat, was a wound, fresh and raw. Miss Marple folded the sketch and placed it in her knitting bag, satisfied that she had taken the first step in understanding Coral Cove's undercurrents. The night was still, the argument resolved for now, but she knew the morning would bring new clues, new voices, and perhaps new dangers. She closed her eyes, the note's warning lingering like the scent of frangipani on the breeze. Chapter 2. Shadows on the sand. The moon hung low over Coral Cove, casting a silver sheen across the beach where the night's festivities were in full swing. Miss Jane Marple sat on a wicker chair at the edge of the party, her shawl draped lightly over her shoulders, her eyes sharp despite the late hour. The steel drum band had given way to a guitarist strumming a soulful tune, and guests swayed under strings of lanterns that bobbed like fireflies. The air was thick with the scent of grilled pineapple and rum, but Miss Marple's attention was elsewhere, drawn to the subtle currents of tension weaving through the crowd. She had not forgotten the cryptic note from her, "Room beware the one," who paints with Leisnor the heated exchange between Diego Salazar and Celeste Duval at dinner. The crumpled sketch of Miss Duval, its accusing eyes etched in charcoal, rested safely in her knitting bag upstairs. Tonight, Miss Marple intended to observe, to let the island's secrets unfurl like the waves lapping at the shore. The beach was alive with movement. Lady Beatrice twirled with a local dance instructor, her laughter ringing out. Colonel Percival Wren stood near the bar, his posture rigid, a glass of neat whiskey in hand as he scanned the crowd. Miss Duval, resplendent in a silver dress that shimmered like moonlight on water, held court among a cluster of admirers, her smile calculated. Salazar, however, was nowhere to be seen, a fact that piqued Miss Marple's curiosity. She sipped her hibiscus tea, her gaze drifting to the dunes beyond the lanterns, where the darkness seemed to hold its breath. A sudden commotion broke her reverie. A young woman in a floral sarong rushed toward the bar, her voice shrill. "My pendant, it's gone," she cried, holding up a bare neck. "It was my grandmother's, a rare abalone shell. I swear I had it an hour ago." The crowd murmured. Heads turning, Colonel Wren stepped forward, his military bearing intact. Now, Miss Langley," he said, addressing the woman. "No need for hysterics. Likely slipped off in the sand. We'll organize a search." Miss Langley, her cheeks flushed, shook her head. It was clasped tight. "Someone took it. I know it." Her eyes darted toward Miss Duval, who raised an eyebrow but said nothing, her fingers brushing the sapphire earrings that gleamed at her ears. Miss Marple set her tea down, her mind clicking like the needles she'd left upstairs. A missing pendant was no great mystery, but the accusation in Miss Langley's glance suggested something deeper, a grudge, perhaps, or a suspicion. She rose, her movements unhurried, and approached the group. "Might I assist?" she asked. her voice gentle but firm. "I've a knack for finding lost things." Miss Langley, still flustered, nodded. "Please, if you can. It's priceless to me." Miss Marple knelt by the dance area, her eyes scanning the sand where Miss Langley had been twirling earlier. The crowd parted, watching with mild curiosity as she sifted through the grains, her fingers brushing aside shells and pebbles. She noted the Colonel's quick glance toward Miss Duval, and Miss Duval's subtle shift away from the scene, as if distancing herself from scrutiny. Then, glinting faintly under a discarded napkin, Miss Marple spotted it, a delicate pendant shaped like a crescent moon, its abalone shell iridescent in the lantern light. "There we are," she said, holding it up with a smile. "No harm done, I hope." Miss Langley gasped, clutching the pendant to her chest. "Oh, thank you. I thought it was gone forever." The crowd clapped politely, and the tension eased, the guitarist striking up a lively tune. But Miss Marple's eyes lingered on the napkin, which bore a faint smudge of charcoal. She tucked it into her sleeve, her thoughts circling back to Salazar. As the party resumed, Miss Marple wandered toward the bar, where Leo, the bartender from the previous evening, was mixing cocktails with a practiced flair. "You've a sharp eye, ma'am," he said, grinning as he slid a glass of coconut water her way. "Not many would have spotted that pendant in the dark." "One learns to notice details," Miss Marple replied, her tone mild. "Tell me, Leo, have you seen Mr. Salazar tonight? He seems to have vanished after dinner." Leo's grin faltered, his eyes flicking toward the dunes. "He was here earlier, sketching by the fire pit. Said he needed air after." "Well, you saw him and Miss Duval go at it. He's probably off sulking somewhere." Miss Marple nodded, sipping her drink. "And Miss Langley, does she often lose things, or was this unusual?" Leo leaned closer, lowering his voice. "She's not careless, if that's what you mean, but she's been jumpy since she got here. Keeps asking about some old shipwreck, same as Miss Duval. Funny enough, maybe they're after the same treasure." He winked, but Miss Marple sensed a kernel of truth in his jest. She thanked him and strolled toward the dunes, her sandals silent. On the sand, the music faded behind her, replaced by the rhythmic crash of waves. The dunes rose like soft hills, their shadows pooling in the moonlight. She paused, her eyes catching a faint movement of figure, tall and lean, standing at the edge of the dunes, half hidden by a cluster of sea oats. The silhouette was unmistakable. Diego Salazar, his sketchbook tucked under his arm, his posture tense as if waiting for someone. Miss Marple stepped back, concealing herself behind a palm tree. She watched as Salazar paced, muttering to himself. In Spanish, his words too soft to catch. Then, abruptly, he froze, his head snapping toward the resort. A second figure emerged from the shadows, not Miss Duval, as Miss Marple expected, but a man in a dark jacket, his face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. The two exchanged words, their voices low and urgent. Salazar handed over a small package, and the man slipped something into Salazar's pocket before vanishing into the night. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but she remained still, her years of discretion guiding her. Salazar lingered a moment, then turned back toward the party, his expression unreadable. As he passed, Miss Marple caught a glimpse of his sketchbook, its pages fluttering open to reveal a drawing of the dunes, with a strange symbol coiled, snake etched in the corner. She returned to the party, her mind buzzing. The pendant's recovery had calmed the guests, and Miss Langley was now dancing with a young man, her smile genuine. Miss Duval, however, was watching the Colonel, who had retreated to a corner with his whiskey, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Miss Marple settled back into her chair, her fingers brushing the charcoal-smudged napkin in her sleeve. The snake symbol, the secretive exchange, the lingering tension between Duval and Salazaret was a puzzle, but one with a shape she was beginning to discern. As the party wound down, Miss Marple bid good night to Beatrice, who was flushed with dancing and rum. "You're awfully quiet, Jane," Beatrice teased. "Plotting something?" "Merely enjoying the evening," Miss Marple replied, her smile serene. Upstairs, she unfolded the napkin, studying the charcoal smudge. It wasn't random, it matched the texture of Salazar's sketch. She placed it beside the note from her room, the words, "Paints with lies," staring back at her. The pendant was safe, the party undisturbed, but the shadow in the dunes lingered in her mind, a quiet promise of secrets yet to be uncovered. Chapter 3. The Tide Turns. The morning sun blazed over Coral Cove, painting the beach in hues of gold and coral. Miss Jane Marple sat on her veranda, a cup of Earl Grey steaming beside her knitting, as she watched fishermen haul their nets from the turquoise shallows. The events of the previous night, the recovered pendant, Diego Salazar's secretive exchange in the dunes, the coiled snake symbol in his sketch, lingered in her mind like the aftertaste of strong tea. She had tucked the charcoal-smudged napkin and the mysterious note into her knitting bag, their secrets safe for now. Coral Cove, she sensed, was a place where truths hid beneath the surface, much like the reefs beneath the waves. As she sipped her tea, a young fisherman approached the resort's boardwalk, his straw hat tilted against the glare. He clutched a glass bottle, its surface encrusted with barnacles, and waved it excitedly toward a group of guests breakfasting under a thatched canopy. "Found something strange," he called, his voice carrying over the chatter. "Washed up with the tide." Miss Marple set her cup down and joined the curious onlookers, her sensible shoes clicking on the wooden planks. The fisherman, whose name she learned was Matteo, held the bottle aloft, revealing a rolled parchment inside. "It's got writing on it," he said, squinting. "Looks old, but I ain't no scholar." Colonel Percival Wren, his breakfast interrupted, strode over with a scowl. "Let's have a look, lad. Probably some tourist's prank." He took the bottle, but his thick fingers fumbled with the cork. Drawing a chuckle from the crowd, Miss Marple stepped forward, her voice calm. "May I?" She accepted the bottle, her movements precise, and eased the cork free with a gentle twist. The parchment slid out, brittle but intact, its ink faded yet legible. The guests leaned in, their murmurs rising, but Miss Marple's eyes narrowed as she scanned the text, a series of numbers and cryptic phrases, 12N, 3W, under the sentinel's gaze. It was no prank, she was certain. It was a code. "Likely nonsense," Colonel Wren huffed, but his gaze lingered on the parchment, a flicker of unease crossing his face. Miss Celeste Duval, sipping a mimosa, sauntered over, her silk scarf fluttering. "Oh, how thrilling. A treasure map, perhaps." Her tone was playful, but her eyes locked onto the parchment with an intensity that belied her casual air. Miss Marple smiled thinly. "Perhaps, or a message meant for someone specific." She folded the parchment and slipped it into her pocket, promising Matteo to share any findings. The fisherman grinned, pleased to be part of the excitement, and the crowd dispersed, buzzing with speculation. Back on her veranda, Miss Marple studied the parchment, her knitting needles idle for once. The numbers suggested coordinates, and Sentinel's gaze hinted at a landmark. Coral Cove's coastline was dotted with odd rock formations, one of which a towering spire locals called the Sentinel stood near a secluded cove. Her curiosity piqued. She decided to investigate, but not without caution. The note from her room, "Beware, the one who paints with Lisanne Salazar's clandestine meeting," suggested that secrets here were guarded jealously. She donned a wide-brimmed hat and set out along a coastal path, her parasol shielding her from the midday sun. The trail wound through mangroves, their roots twisting like ancient fingers, and emerged at a hidden cove where the Sentinel loomed, its shadow stretching across the sand. Miss Marple paused, her eyes scanning the scene. A lone dinghy bobbed offshore, and two figures stood near the water's edge, their voices low but urgent. She crouched behind a cluster of sea grapes, her heart steady despite the thrill tingling through her. One figure was unmistakable: Mr. Felix Montez, the resort's manager, his crisp suit incongruous against the wild backdrop. The other was a stranger, a wiry man in a faded cap, his gestures sharp. Montez handed over a small canvas bag, and the stranger slipped a folded paper into his pocket before rowing back to the dinghy. Miss Marple's lips pursed. The exchange mirrored Salazar's encounter in the dunes, though the players were different. Before she could retreat, a scream shattered the cove's quiet. Miss Marple turned to see Miss Langley, the pendant-wearing guest from the previous night, stumbling from the path, her face pale. "A knife," she gasped, pointing toward a cluster of cabanas near the resort's edge. "There's blood on it." Miss Marple hurried back with Miss Langley, the cove's secrets momentarily set aside. A small crowd had gathered near the cabanas, where a kitchen knife lay in the sand, its blade streaked with crimson. Colonel Wren, already on the scene, barked orders to keep back. Miss Duval stood nearby, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Diego Salazar, sketchbook in hand, hovered at the crowd's edge, his eyes darting between the knife and Montez, who had just arrived. His face a mask of calm. Miss Marple knelt beside the knife, her gloved fingers hovering but not touching. The blood was fresh, but the blade's edge was oddly clean, as if staged. She glanced at the nearby cabana, where a young staff member, visibly shaken, admitted to playing a prank. "It's pig's blood," he stammered, "from the kitchen. Me and my mates thought it'd be a laugh." The crowd exhaled, some laughing nervously, others muttering disapproval. Colonel Wren clapped the boy on the shoulder, too heartily. "No harm done, eh? Just a bit of fun." But Miss Marple caught the relief in his eyes, and Miss Duval, quick glance at Montez, didn't escape her notice. As the group dispersed, Miss Marple lingered, her mind turning over the morning's events. The coded message, the cove exchange, the staged knifefall were pieces of a puzzle, distinct yet connected. She returned to her room, unfolding the parchment to study it anew. Using a pocket map of the island, she confirmed the coordinates, pointed to the Sentinel's Cove, a place now tied to Montez's secretive dealings. The prank, though resolved, had stirred the resort's undercurrents, exposing flickers of fear and suspicion among the guests. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Miss Marple joined Beatrice for a quiet dinner on the terrace. The air was cooler, scented with jasmine, and the mood lighter after the knife's explanation. Beatrice, sipping a glass of rose, chuckled. "Jane, you've a nose for trouble. That knife business, did it give you a fright?" "Not a fright, dear," Miss Marple replied, her eyes twinkling. merely a reminder that even pranks cast shadows. She retired early, her knitting bag heavier with the parchment and napkin. The knife incident, though trivial, had brought clarity. Someone wanted the guests on edge, distracted perhaps from other matters. The Cove exchange suggested a network of secrets, and the coded message hinted at a purpose yet to be uncovered. Miss Marple felt a quiet satisfaction in resolving the knife's mystery, but the sentinel's gaze loomed in her thoughts, beckoning her toward the next thread in Coral Cove's tangled web. Chapter 4. Whispers in the Palms. The morning after the bloodied knife incident. Coral Cove shimmered under a cloudless sky, the air heavy with the scent of salt and blooming oleander. Miss Jane Marple sat in the resort's open-air cafe, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically as she sipped a glass of tamarind juice. The coded message from the bottle, safely tucked in her room, and the shadowy exchange at the Sentinel's Cove lingered in her thoughts. The island's secrets were like the tide ebbing briefly, only to surge back with greater force. Today, she intended to tug at another thread, guided by the cryptic note's warning, "Beware the one who paints with lies." The cafe buzzed with guests, their chatter a lively counterpoint to the distant crash of waves. Lady Beatrice, ever the social butterfly, flitted between tables. But Miss Marple's attention was drawn to Diego Salazar, who sat alone in a corner, sketching furiously. His hands moved with a feverish energy, and his eyes darted toward Miss Celeste Duval, who was laughing with a group of newcomers near a hibiscus hedge. The tension between them, so palpable at the welcome dinner, seemed to have settled into a wary distance. Miss Marple rose, her movements deliberate, and approached the bar where Leo, the bartender, was slicing limes with a practiced hand. His easy grin greeted her. "Morning, Miss Marple. You're up early for a holidaymaker." "I find mornings sharpen the mind," she replied, her voice soft but probing. "You've a keen ear for the resort's pulse, Leo. Tell me, what do you know of Mr. Salazar's troubles? He seems unsettled." Leo's knife paused, his eyes flicking toward Salazar. "Diego, he's a genius with a brush, but he's got a knack for stirring the pot. Last year, he painted a mural in town, some old island tale about a cursed pearl. Locals loved it, but the resort owner, Mr. Montez, was livid. Said it brought up bad history. Diego's been on thin ice since." Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloguing the detail. "And Miss Duval, she seems to know him well." Leo chuckled, lowering his voice. "Oh, she knows him, all right. Word is, they crossed paths in Paris years back. Something about a gallery deal gone sour. She's got a sharp tongue, that one, and Diego's not one to back down." Thanking him, Miss Marple strolled toward the beach, her parasol casting a dappled shadow. The sand was warm under her shoes, and she paused to admire a cluster of conch shells arranged by a local vendor. As she bent to inspect one, a gust of wind carried a torn scrap of paper to her feet. She picked it up, her heart quickening at the sight of a photograph, half of one, at least. It showed a younger Diego Salazar, arm in arm with a woman whose face was eerily familiar, Celeste Duval, her smile as radiant then as it was guarded now. The other half of the photograph was missing, but the jagged tear suggested it had been ripped deliberately. Miss Marple tucked the fragment into her sleeve, her mind racing. The note's warning about lies, Leo's tale of a Paris scandal, and now this photograph, each was a piece of a puzzle. But the picture remained elusive. That evening, the resort hosted a salsa dance night under a canopy of fairy lights. The rhythm of drums and maracas filled the air, and guests swirled across a wooden platform, their laughter mingling with the music. Miss Marple, in a modest cream dress, sat near the edge, her knitting a pretext for observation. Colonel Percival, Wren, his face flushed from rum, attempted a stiff two-step with a local instructor. Miss Duval, resplendent in a crimson gown, danced with a grace that drew every eye, though her smile faltered when she glanced at Salazar. Salazar himself was a study in contrasts, his movements fluid yet erratic, as if the music fought with some inner turmoil. He partnered briefly with Miss Langley, the pendant wearer, but his eyes kept straying to Miss Duval. When the band paused, he slipped away, heading toward the palm-lined path that led to the resort's gardens. Miss Marple followed, at a discreet distance, her steps silent on the soft earth. The gardens were a maze of frangipani and ferns, lit by flickering torches. She found Salazar by a fountain, his sketchbook open, his pencil scratching furiously. He didn't notice her approach until she spoke, her voice gentle but firm. "Mr. Salazar, your work is quite striking. Might I see what you're drawing?" He flinched, snapping the book shut. "It's nothing, just impressions." His accent was thick, his eyes wary. Miss Marple smiled, undeterred. "You've a gift for capturing truth, but truth can be dangerous, can't it?" Salazar's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, his fingers gripping the sketchbook. Miss Marple nodded, as if he'd answered, and returned to the dance, her mind turning over his reaction. She rejoined Beatrice, who was fanning herself with a palm leaf. "Jane, you're missing all the fun. Why chase shadows when you could be dancing?" "Shadows have their own rhythm," Miss Marple replied, her eyes twinkling. Later, as the dance wound down, Miss Marple retired to her room and retrieved the torn photograph. She laid it beside the coded parchment and the charcoal-smudged napkin, studying them under the soft glow of a lamp. The photograph's other half, she suspected, held a key to Salazar and Duval's shared past. She began to piece it together, her memory supplying details. Leo's mention of a Paris gallery, the mural's controversy, the coiled snake in Salazar's sketch. The connection was there, just out of reach. She rose and crossed to the window, where the palms swayed under a starlit sky. The photograph's discovery had clarified one thread: Salazar and Duval were bound by more than a quarrel. Their history, whatever it was, pulsed beneath Coral Cove's surface, tied to secrets the island guarded fiercely. Miss Marple felt a quiet satisfaction in this small revelation. But the night's whispers carried on the breeze, and in the glances of wary guests promised more to uncover. For now, the dance had ended, the photograph was safe, and she was one step closer to the truth. Chapter 5. The storm approaches the sky over Coral Cove, hung heavy with the promise of a storm. Its bruised clouds rolling in from the horizon like an uninvited guest. Miss Jane Marple stood on her veranda, her shawl drawn tight against the rising wind, watching the palms bend and the sea churn. The torn photograph, the coded parchment, and the charcoal-smudged napkin rested in her knitting bag, each a silent clue to the island's secrets. The cryptic note: "Beware, the one who paints with lysicode," in her mind. Its warning sharpened by Diego Salazar's guarded demeanor and Celeste Duval's calculated charm. Today, Miss Marple sensed, the gathering storm would stir more than the waves. By mid-morning, the resort staff had battened down shutters and moved wicker furniture indoors, urging guests to gather in the grand lounge. The room, with its polished teak floors and ceiling fans, buzzed with restless energy. Guests sipped cocktails or played cards, their laughter tinged with unease as thunder rumbled in the distance. Miss Marple settled into a cushioned armchair, her knitting needles clicking steadily, her eyes roaming the crowd. Colonel Percival Wren paced near a window, his hands clasped behind his back as if awaiting a military briefing. Miss Duval, in a jade-green dress, leafed through a fashion magazine, her fingers lingering on the pages. Diego Salazar was absent, likely holed up in his room, but Mr. Felix Montez, the resort manager, moved among the guests, his smile as polished as the silver tray he carried. Miss Marple's attention was drawn to a heated exchange near the bar, where Miss Duval's voice cut through the hum of conversation. "You're mistaken, Colonel," she said, her tone icy. "I've no interest in your old war stories or your threats." Colonel Wren's face reddened, his moustache bristling. "Threats? I'm warning you, young lady, keep your nose out of matters that don't concern you. You'll regret poking into the past." The room quieted, heads turning. Miss Duval stood, her magazine falling to the floor. "And you'll regret assuming I'm easily cowed," she snapped, storming toward the staircase. The colonel muttered something under his breath and returned to his whiskey, his hands trembling slightly. Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind cataloguing the exchange. Blackmail, or something close to it, hung in the air. She recalled Leo's gossip about a scandal involving the colonel and a missing fortune, and the torn photograph linking Salazar and Duval. The threads were converging, but the pattern remained elusive as rain began to lash the windows. Miss Marple excused herself and made her way to the resort's library, a dimly lit room lined with leather-bound books and nautical charts. The storm's confinement offered a chance to dig deeper, and she had a hunch the library held answers. She scanned the shelves, her fingers trailing over titles until she found a dusty ledger tucked behind a volume on island folklore. Its pages, yellowed with age, detailed the resort's financial transactions from a decade ago, payments to unnamed suppliers, coded entries marked with a familiar symbol, a coiled snake. Her pulse quickened. The same symbol had appeared in sketch, and now here, in records tied to the resort's past. She flipped through the ledger, noting discrepancies, large sums paid out with no clear purpose, dated around the time of a rumored shipwreck scandal. Before she could read further, a muffled voice reached her ears, coming from the hallway. She slipped the ledger back into place and stepped to the door. Peering through a cracked dot, Mr. Montez stood in the corridor, his back to her, speaking into a telephone. "The delivery's on schedule," he said, his voice low. "No delays, despite the storm. Ensure it's ready by tomorrow." He hung up abruptly, glancing around before striding away. Miss Marple's lips pursed. Montez's secretive exchange at the Sentinel's Cove, and now this call, suggested a scheme larger than a single guest's grudge. She returned to the lounge, where the storm's roar had intensified, rattling the shutters. The guests, now restless, had gathered for a game of charades, their forced cheer a thin veneer over the tension. Miss Marple rejoined them, her calm demeanor masking the whirl of her thoughts. As the afternoon waned, the storm broke, its fury giving way to a golden dusk. The staff opened the shutters, and guests spilled onto the terrace, eager for fresh air. A spontaneous dance erupted, the band striking up a lively calypso tune. Miss Marple, declining to join, watched from a bench, her eyes catching a glint in the sand near the terrace's edge. She bent down, retrieving a monogrammed handkerchief, its initials, FM, unmistakably. Montez's. It was damp, as if dropped during the storm, and stained with a faint smear of ink. She tucked it into her sleeve, her mind racing. The ledgers. Snake symbol, Montez's cryptic call. The handkerchief fall pointed to a hidden operation, one the storm had failed to wash away. The colonel's confrontation with Duval suggested he, too, was entangled, perhaps as a victim or a perpetrator. And Salazar, with his lies and sketches, remained a shadow at the edge of the puzzle. As the evening wound down, Miss Marple sat with Beatrice, who was flushed from dancing. "Jane, you're awfully quiet," Beatrice said, fanning herself. "This storm's got everyone on edge, but you seem elsewhere." "Merely savouring the calm," Miss Marple replied, her smile serene. In her room, she laid the handkerchief beside her other clues, the ledger's details fresh in her memory. The storm had passed, the guests were at ease, and the handkerchief was a small but significant find. She felt a quiet satisfaction in this progress, but the coiled snake loomed in her thoughts, its meaning just beyond her grasp, urging her toward the next unraveling of Coral Cove's secrets. Chapter 6. Footprints in the surf. The dawn broke over Coral Cove with a clarity that belied the previous day's storm. The sea now a mirror of turquoise and gold. Miss Jane Marple rose early, her mind as sharp as the morning light. The weight of her collected clues, the coded parchment, the torn photograph, the charcoal-smudged napkin, and the monogrammed handkerchief urging her forward. The ledger's coiled snake symbol and Mr. Montez's cryptic phone call had deepened her suspicion of a hidden scheme, one that wove through the resort's guests like a current beneath calm waters. Today, she resolved to follow a new lead, guided by the note's persistent warning, "Beware the one who paints with lies." She chose a quiet breakfast on the beach, where the rhythmic lap of waves offered a backdrop for thought. As she nibbled on fresh papaya, her eyes followed the shoreline, where early risers strolled. Among them was a young bellhop, Tomas, whose quick smile and eager chatter had caught her attention at check-in. She beckoned him over, offering a slice of fruit. "Tomas, you know every corner of this resort. Are there places guests seldom see? Somewhere private?" Tomas grinned, wiping his hands on his uniform. "Plenty of spots, ma'am. There's a boathouse down by the North Beach hold, half forgotten. Staff use it for storage, but it's locked tight. Mr. Montez keeps the key." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Locked, you say? That's most interesting." After breakfast, she set out along the North Beach, her parasol shielding her from the rising sun. The path was less trodden, fringed with sea grapes and driftwood, leading to a weathered boathouse nestled against a rocky outcrop. Its door was padlocked, but the sand nearby bore fresh footprints, two sets, one large, one smaller, leading from the water's edge to the door and back. She knelt, her gloved fingers tracing the prints, noting their depth and the scuff of a heel. As if someone had carried something heavy, her curiosity piqued. She glanced around, ensuring she was alone, then examined the lock. It was sturdy but old, its keyhole scratched as if recently used. She had no key, but Tomas' words echoed Montez held access. Before she could ponder further, a rustle in the nearby bushes made her straighten. Tomas himself emerged, his face sheepish. "Saw you heading this way, ma'am. Thought you might need help." Miss Marple smiled, sensing an opportunity. "You're very kind, Tomas. This boathouse. Does anyone visit it often?" He hesitated, glancing at the door. "Not supposed to say, but I've seen Mr. Montez come here at odd hours. Once I caught a glimpse in side boxes, crates, all covered up. Looked like stuff nobody should be moving." Her heart quickened, but her voice remained calm. Could you, perhaps, help an old lady satisfy her curiosity? I'd be most grateful. Thomas wavered, then nodded, producing a small ring of keys. I borrowed these from the staff room. Don't tell, all right? He unlocked the door, pushing it open with a creak. The boathouse was dim, smelling of salt and mildew, its floor cluttered with crates draped in tarps. Miss Marple stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the gloom. She lifted a tarp, revealing a stack of small wooden boxes, one of which was open, exposing a bundle of passports each, with a different name but the same photograph. A man she didn't recognize, forged. She murmured, her mind racing. Thomas' eyes widened, but before he could speak, footsteps crunched outside. Miss Marple gestured for silence, pulling him behind a crate. Through a crack in the wall, she saw Colonel Wren, his face grim, inspecting the footprints she'd noticed. He muttered something, then turned back toward the resort, his stride purposeful. Once he was gone, Miss Marple and Thomas slipped out, locking the door behind them. "You've been a great help, Thomas," she said, pressing a coin into his hand. "But this stays between us." He nodded, his face pale. "What's in those boxes, ma'am? Trouble?" "Trouble, indeed," she replied, her tone gentle but firm. "But nothing we can't handle." Back at the resort, Miss Marple sought out Beatrice, who was lounging by the pool with a novel. "Jane, you're always wandering off," Beatrice teased. "Find any treasures today?" "Only questions," Miss Marple said, her smile enigmatic. She excused herself and made her way to the reception desk, where she requested a favor from a clerk, a contact in town who could verify military records. She handed over Colonel Wren's name, citing a vague interest in his war stories. The clerk promised to send a telegram and report back by afternoon. A response arrived. The colonel's records showed service in Burma, but gaps in his timeline raised questions, particularly around a court-martial that was mysteriously dropped. Miss Marple tucked the telegram away, her thoughts circling the boathouse's contents. Forged passports suggested smuggling, or worse, and the colonel's presence at the scene hinted at his involvement. The snake symbol, Montez's secretive dealings. And now this Coral Cove was a nest of intrigue. Determined to act, Miss contacted the local authorities through a discreet note, reporting the boathouse's contents without naming herself. By evening, word spread that the police had seized the passports, declaring them part of an ongoing investigation. The resort buzzed with gossip, but no one connected the tip to the quiet old lady knitting on the veranda. As the sun set, Miss Marple joined Beatrice for a glass of iced tea, the air now cool and fragrant with jasmine. The immediate threat of the passports was resolved, the authorities alerted, and the guests none the wiser. Yet Miss Marple's satisfaction was tempered by new questions. Who was the man in the photographs, and how did the colonel fit into this web? The footprints in the surf had led her to a discovery, but the tide of secrets was far from receding. Chapter 7. The masquerade ball. The evening air at Coral Cove carried a festive hum. The resort transformed into a kaleidoscope of color and mystery for the annual masquerade ball. Fairy lights twinkled along the verandas, and the scent of orchids mingled with the tang of the sea. Miss Jane Marple, dressed in a simple silver gown with a lace mask that left her keen eyes unobstructed, stood at the edge of the ballroom, her knitting bag replaced by a small clutch containing the coded parchment. Torn photograph, smudged napkin, handkerchief, and the memory of the boathouse's forged passports. The note's warning, "Beware the one who paints with lysicode," as she surveyed the masked figures swirling to a sultry tango. Tonight, she sensed, the island's secrets would wear their own disguises. The ballroom, with its open walls too. The tropical night was a spectacle of feathers, sequins, and hidden glances. Lady Beatrice, resplendent in a peacock mask, twirled with a local dignitary, her laughter bright. Colonel Percival Wren, his face half hidden by a black domino mask, stood near a pillar, his posture stiff as he sipped a gin. Diego Salazar, in a crimson mask that matched his flamboyant jacket, sketched in a corner, his eyes darting restlessly. Miss Celeste Duval, her identity unmistakable despite a sapphire-studded mask, moved through the crowd like a queen, her gown shimmering with each step. Miss Marple's attention sharpened when she noticed Miss Duval slip a folded note to Mr. Felix Montez, the resort manager, whose plain black mask did little to conceal his guarded expression. He pocketed the note and vanished into the crowd, heading toward a side door. Miss Marple followed her steps, silent on the polished floor, weaving through dancers with the grace of someone who knew how to go unnoticed. Outside, the night was warm, the music muffled by the rustle of palms. Montez disappeared down a path toward the resort's administrative wing, and Miss Marple, mindful of her limits, returned to the ball, filing away the exchange for later. Back in the ballroom, the mood shifted as a portly man in a jester's mask stumbled, clutching his throat and gasping poison. The music faltered, and the crowd parted, gasps rippling through the room. Miss Marple moved swiftly, her calm presence cutting through the panic. She knelt beside the man, noting his flushed face and the glass of punch she'd dropped. "Breathe." "Slowly," she said, her voice steady. "Tell me what you tasted." "Burning, bitter," he wheezed, his eyes wide behind his mask. She sniffed the spilled punch, detecting a faint almond-like temps, but her keen eye caught something else. A smear of pollen on his fingers, likely from the hibiscus centerpiece he'd been near. "Sir, do you have allergies?" she asked. He nodded, struggling to speak. "Pollen, sometimes." Miss Marple turned to a waiter. "Fetch ice water and the resort's medic quickly." To the crowd, she added, "Please, give him air." Within minutes, the medic confirmed an allergic reaction, not poison, and administered a remedy. The man, recovering, thanked her profusely, his jester's bells jingling as he sat up. The band resumed, and the guests, relieved, returned to their dancing. The incident chalked up to a misunderstanding. Miss Marple, however, was not so quick to dismiss it. The man's panic had been genuine, but the timing moments after Duval's note to Montez felt orchestrated. A distraction, perhaps. She returned to her spot by the wall, her eyes scanning the room. Salazar was now dancing with Miss Langley, the pendant wearer, but his movements were mechanical, his gaze fixed on Miss Duval, who had rejoined the crowd with a serene smile. As the night wore on, Miss Marple slipped away to a quiet alcove, where she overheard two staff members whispering about the jester incident. One mentioned seeing Montez near the punch table before the chaos, adjusting glasses with a cloth. She made a mental note, her thoughts circling back to the note Duval had passed. During a break in the music, she approached a young maid, Maria, who had been clearing tables. "My dear," Miss Marple said, her tone gentle, "did you see Miss Duval with Mr. Montez earlier? They seemed preoccupied." Maria hesitated, then nodded. "I saw her give him something, ma'am, a paper, folded small. He looked nervous. Went straight to his office after." Miss Marple thanked her and returned to the ball, her clutch heavier with purpose. Near midnight, as the crowd thinned, she found a discarded napkin near Montez's usual spot, its edge marked with a faint ink stain. She unfolded it carefully, revealing a scrawled message: "Midnight East Pier, final terms." The handwriting matched the coded parchment style, and the ink resembled the smear on Montez's handkerchief. She tucked the napkin into her clutch, her mind piecing together the night's events. The allergic reaction, resolved swiftly, had shifted attention from Montez and Duval's exchange, but the note confirmed a clandestine meeting. The masquerade's masks had hidden faces, but not motives, and Miss Marple felt a quiet satisfaction in uncovering the note, a tangible link to the island's undercurrents. As she bid goodnight to Beatrice, who was flushed with dancing, the ball's glamour faded into the background, replaced by the sharp clarity of a new clue. "Jane, you're too serious for such a lively night," Beatrice teased, adjusting her peacock mask. "Even masks reveal something," Miss Marple replied, her smile enigmatic. In her room, she laid the midnight note beside her other clues, the pieces of Coral Cove's puzzle aligning slowly but surely. Chapter 8. Secrets in the Coral. The sun blazed over Coral Cove, its rays piercing the turquoise depths where colourful fish darted among the coral reefs. Miss Jane Marple, equipped with a borrowed snorkel mask and fins, glided through the warm water, her movements surprisingly agile for a woman of her years. The masquerade ball's revelations, the note passed from Celeste Duval to Felix Montez, the jester's allergic scare, and the midnight rendezvous scribbled on a napkin had sharpened her resolve. The cryptic warning, "Beware the one who paints with lies," pointed ever more insistently toward Diego Salazar. But the web of secrets extended beyond him, and Miss Marple was determined to explore every corner of the island's mysteries. She had joined a morning snorkeling excursion, ostensibly for leisure, but her keen eyes scanned the reef for more than tropical wonders. The group, led by a cheerful guide named Cale, included Miss Langley, the pendant wearer, and a few other guests, but neither Duval, Salazar, nor Colonel Wren had joined. As Miss Marple drifted over a bed of staghorn coral, a glint caught her attention, a small, metallic object wedged between two rocks. She dove closer, her breath steady through the snorkel, and retrieved a locket, its silver surface tarnished but intact. Inside, she found a faded photograph, a younger Diego Salazar, his arm around an unfamiliar man with sharp features and a crooked smile. The locket's chain was broken, as if torn off in haste. Back on the beach, Miss Marple dried off, wrapping herself in a cotton shawl. She examined the locket under the shade of a palm, her fingers tracing its intricate engravings of faint coiled snake, mirroring the symbol in Salazar's sketch and the resort's ledger. The photograph inside was a new clue, but its significance was unclear. Who was the man, and why had the locket been discarded in the reef? As she returned to the resort, she overheard a commotion near the main lobby. Guests were gathered, their voices raised in concern. "Mr. Salazar's gone," Miss Langley exclaimed, clutching her pendant. "He didn't show for breakfast, and his room's empty." Miss Marple's pulse quickened, but she maintained her calm demeanor. Joining the group, Mr. Montez, his face a mask of professional concern, assured everyone that Salazar was likely exploring the island. "He's an artist, after all, probably. Chasing inspiration," he said, though his eyes flicked nervously toward the beach dot. Miss Marple, unconvinced, sought out Leo, the bartender, who was polishing glasses behind the bar. "Leo," she said, her voice low, "when did you last see Mr. Salazar?" He leaned closer, his grin absent. "Last night, at the ball, he was acting strange, kept muttering about fixing things. Said he was going for a walk by the cliffs. Haven't seen him since. Her thoughts raced. The locket, the midnight note, and now Salazar's disappearance, each piece suggested a deepening plot. She recalled the ledger's coded entries and the boathouse's forged passports, wondering if Salazar's absence was voluntary or coerced. Determined to connect the dots, she revisited the ledger's details in her memory. Its snake symbol tying Montez to a smuggling operation. The locket's photograph hinted at a personal connection, perhaps a betrayal. By afternoon, Miss Marple joined a search party organized by Montez, though she suspected it was more for show than substance. They combed the cliffs and beaches, calling Salazar's name, but found no trace. As dusk approached, a shout came from the north beach, near the boathouse. Miss Marple hurried over, finding Tomas, the bellhop, standing over a crumpled figure. In the sand, it was Salazar, disheveled and reeking of rum, his sketchbook clutched to his chest. "He's alive," Tomas called, helping Salazar sit up. The artist blinked, his eyes bleary. "Got lost. Too much drink," he mumbled, his accent thick. Miss Marple knelt beside him, her gaze gentle but probing. "Mr. Salazar, you gave us quite a scare. Did you lose something in the reef, perhaps?" She held up the locket, watching his reaction. His face paled, his fingers tightening on the sketchbook. "That's mine. Where did you find it?" "In the coral," she said, handing it to him. "It tells a story, doesn't it?" He said nothing, pocketing the locket with trembling hands. The search party, relieved, escorted him back to the resort, where Montez arranged for a doctor to check him. The guests dispersed, satisfied that the crisis was resolved. But Miss Marple lingered, her mind turning over the locket's significance. The photograph linked Salazar to an unknown figure, and his disappearance, however brief, suggested fear or flight. That evening, she sat with Beatrice on the terrace, the stars bright above. Beatrice, sipping a mango daiquiri, chuckled. "Jane, you're always finding drama. Salazar's just a drunk artist, isn't he?" "Even drunks have secrets," Miss Marple replied, her smile faint. In her room, she placed the locket's image in her mind alongside her clouser. Napkins, midnight note, the ledger snake, the forged passports. Salazar's safe return closed one chapter, but the locket opened another. Its coiled snake a silent promise of deeper truths waiting in Coral Cove's shadows. Chapter 9. The midnight confession. The night air at Coral Cove was thick with the scent of salt and impending rain, the stars veiled by wisps of cloud. Miss Jane Marple sat by her open window, the faint glow of a lamp illuminating her knitting, though her needles lay still. Her collection of clues, the coded parchment, torn photograph, smudged napkin, monogrammed handkerchief, and the mental image of the locket's coiled snake formed a constellation of secrets, each pointing to a smuggling operation weaving through the resort. The midnight note from the masquerade ball, scribbled with midnight East Pier final terms, burned in her memory. Tonight, she resolved to witness the meeting it promised. Guided by the cryptic warning, "Beware the one who paints with lies." The resort was quiet, the masquerade's revelry a fading echo. Miss Marple, dressed in a dark shawl and soft shoes, slipped out of her room, her movements silent as she navigated the moonlit paths. The East Pier, a weathered stretch of wood jutting into the sea, was a short walk from the main building, its solitude perfect for clandestine dealings. She positioned herself behind a cluster of mangroves, their tangled roots shielding her from view. The tide whispered against the pilings, and a distant owl hooted, setting her nerves on edge. At precisely midnight, two figures emerged on the pier. Miss Marple's sharp eyes identified them. Celeste Duval, her silhouette unmistakable even in a hooded cloak, and Felix Montez, his posture tense, a small satchel in hand. Their voices were low, but the still night carried fragments to her hiding spot. "It's the last shipment," Duval said, her tone sharp. "No more delays, Felix." The buyers impatient. Montez's reply was strained. "I've done my part. The storm set us back, but it's ready. You'll have it tomorrow." Duval stepped closer, her voice dropping to a hiss. "And the artist? He's been sniffing around. If he talks, he won't," Montez cut in. "I've handled it." Miss Marple's pulse quickened. The artist Diego Salazar had stumbled back to the resort reeking of rum, his locket a clue to a deeper connection. Was his disappearance a warning or something more? She strained to hear more, but the pair fell silent, exchanging the satchel before parting. Duval toward the resort, Montez toward a small boat moored nearby. Miss Marple waited until the pier was empty, then emerged, her mind racing. The conversation confirmed a smuggling plot with Duval and Montez at its heart. Salazar's involvement, whether as threat or accomplice, was unclear, but the locket's photograph suggested a personal stake. She needed an ally, someone with access to the resort's pulse. And her thoughts turned to Leo, the bartender, whose gossip had proven reliable. She found him the next morning at the beach bar, polishing glasses as the breakfast crowd trickled in. The air was fresh, the storm's threat gone, but Miss Marple's purpose was undeterred. "Leo," she said, her voice low, "you've a knack for hearing things others miss. Have you heard anything about a shipment, perhaps tied to Mr. Montez?" Leo's grin faltered, his eyes scanning the bar. "You don't miss much, do you?" "Ma'am, last night I overheard Montez on the phone, same spot he always uses, behind the kitchen. Talked about a final drop at the cove. Sounded nervous, kept mentioning the artist and keeping him quiet. I didn't like the sound of it." Miss Marple's lips pursed. "And did you hear anything about Miss Duval?" Leo nodded, leaning closer. "She's in deep. I saw her slip Montez a note at the ball, and they've been thick as thieves since. But I'm scared, ma'am. If they're moving something illegal, I don't want to be caught in the middle." She placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "You're brave to share this, Leo. Would you be willing to help me? I need access to Montez's office discreetly." Leo hesitated, then sighed. "All right, I've got a spare key. Cleaners use it. But you didn't get it from me." By noon, he slipped her a small brass key, its edges worn from use. Miss Marple waited until the afternoon, when Montez was occupied with a guest complaint, to slip into his office. The room was tidy, its desk stacked with ledgers and a locked drawer that yielded to the key. Inside, she found a single documenter. Shipping manifest listing crates bound for an unmarked vessel, marked with the coiled snake symbol. The dates aligned with the storm's delay, and a handwritten note mentioned the artist's silence. Her heart sank. Salazar was a liability to their scheme, but how? She pocketed nothing, committing the details to memory, and locked the drawer. As she left, she heard footsteps and ducked behind a curtain, watching Montez enter, his face drawn. He checked the drawer, satisfied it was secure, and left. That evening, Miss Marple joined Beatrice for a sunset cocktail, the sky ablaze with orange and pink. Beatrice, unaware of the morning's sleuthing, chattered about the ball. "Jane, you're awfully quiet. Not still chasing ghosts, are you? Merely enjoying the view, Miss Marple replied, her smile serene. In her room, she reviewed her clues, the shipping manifest's details confirming the midnight conversation. Leo's help had secured a vital piece, and the immediate threat Salazar's exposure seemed contained as he was back among the guests, sketching quietly. She felt a quiet satisfaction in gaining an ally and a glimpse into the smuggling plot. But the coiled snake's shadow loomed, its final secrets waiting to strike. Chapter 10. Unraveled Threads. The sun dipped low over Coral Cove, casting long shadows across the golden sand as the resort prepared for a beach barbecue. The air was thick with the aroma of grilled shrimp and pineapple, and calypso music drifted. From a makeshift stage, Miss Jane Marple, dressed in a light linen dress, stood near a bonfire, her sharp eyes scanning the crowd. Her clutch held the weight of her clues-coated parchment, torn photograph, smudged napkin, monogrammed handkerchief, and the memory of the locket's coiled snake each tying Diego Salazar, Celeste Duval, Felix Montez, and Colonel Percival Wren to a smuggling operation. The midnight confession on the East Pier and the shipping manifest from Montez's office had confirmed her suspicions. A final shipment was imminent, and Salazar's silence was crucial. Tonight, Miss Marple planned to unravel the threads, using the barbecue's convivial chaos to expose the truth. The guests mingled, their laughter masking the undercurrents of tension Miss Marple had come to recognize. Lady Beatrice, in a floral caftan, chatted with locals near a tiki bar, while Colonel Wren, his face weathered but alert, sipped a rum punch, his eyes darting toward Montez. Miss Duval, radiant in a coral sundress, flirted with a group of young men, her sapphire earrings catching the firelight. Salazar, still shaken from his drunken ordeal, sat alone, sketching the flames, his pencil moving with a nervous energy. Miss Marple approached Leo, the bartender, who was serving coconut cocktails from a bamboo stall. "Leo," she said softly, "you've been invaluable. One last favor, keep an eye on Mr. Montez tonight. If he slips away, let me know." Leo nodded, his expression grim. "He's been jumpy all day, ma'am. I'll watch him." She then sought out Tomas, the bellhop, who was arranging skewers on a grill. "Tomas, if you see Miss Duval or the Colonel move toward the East Pier, could you signal me? Perhaps drop a napkin near my feet." Tomas grinned, eager to help. "You got it, ma'am." As the barbecue unfolded, Miss Marple circulated, her gentle questions sowing subtle discord. She mentioned to Miss Langley, the pendant wearer, that she'd overheard Montez discussing a valuable shipment near the pier, watching her eyes widen with curiosity. To a group of guests, she casually noted Colonel Wren's interest in old shipwrecks, prompting whispers about his past. When she passed Salazar, she paused, her voice low. "Your locket, Mr. Salazar, it tells a story, doesn't it? One worth sharing, perhaps." Salazar's pencil froze, his eyes meeting hers with a mix of fear and defiance. "You don't understand," he muttered, but he didn't elaborate, turning back to his sketch. The trap was set. As the band struck up a lively tune, Miss Marple positioned herself near the bonfire, where she could observe the key players. Montez, serving drinks with forced cheer, kept glancing at his watch. Duval's laughter grew sharper, her glances toward Montez more frequent. Colonel Wren, meanwhile, hovered near the edge of the crowd, his hand in his pocket as if clutching something. Then Tomas dropped a napkin near her feet. Miss Marple glanced up to see Duval slipping away toward the East Pier, her coral dress. A flash in the twilight. Moments later, Montez followed, his satchel in hand. Colonel Wren, noticing their departure, hesitated, then trailed behind. Miss Marple followed at a distance, her steps silent on the sand, the music fading as she neared the pier. In the shadows of the mangroves, she watched the trio converge. Duval's voice was sharp. "This is it, Felix. The artifacts are on that boat. If the colonel doesn't pay, we're done." Wren's tone was gruff. "I've got your money, but I want proof it's the real deal, none of your fakes, Duval." Montez, sweating, opened the satchel, revealing a small, intricately carved idler relic that matched the snake symbol. "It's authentic," he insisted, "from the shipwreck. But we need Salazar out of the way, he knows too much." Miss Marple's heart raced. The artifacts, the snake symbol, the forged passports, it was a smuggling ring trafficking in stolen relics, with Salazar as a potential whistleblower. She stepped forward, her voice clear and calm. "Good evening. It seems I've stumbled upon quite a discussion." The trio froze, their faces a mix of shock and guilt. Duval recovered first, her smile icy. "Miss Marple, this is private business." "Oh, I think the authorities would disagree," Miss Marple said, her tone mild. "Smuggling artifacts is hardly private, and threatening Mr. Salazar is rather unwise." Colonel Wren sputtered, but Montez's shoulders sagged. "How did you?" he began, but Miss Marple raised a hand. "Footprints, notes, and a keen ear," she said. "The police are already aware of your boathouse activities. I suggest you cooperate." As if on cue, flashlights bobbed in the distance. Police, alerted by Miss Marple's earlier anonymous tip, now closing in. Duval dropped the satchel, her composure cracking, while Montez and Wren stood frozen. The officers arrived, seizing the idol and cuffing the trio. Their questions met with stammered excuses. By the time Miss Marple returned to the barbecue, the guests were unaware of the drama, their revelry uninterrupted. Salazar, still sketching, looked up as she passed, his eyes grateful. "You knew?" he asked. "Enough to help," she replied, her smile warm. Beatrice, catching her as she rejoined the party, raised an eyebrow. "Jane, you've got that look again. What mischief have you stirred?" "Merely tidying a few loose ends," Miss Marple said, her eyes twinkling. In her room, she reflected on the night's success, the smugglers exposed, the artifact recovered, the immediate danger resolved. Yet, the locket's unknown man and the shipwreck's full story lingered, a puzzle for another day. For now, she was content, the barbecue's warmth a fitting end to a tangled thread unraveled. Chapter 11. The final sunset. The sun dipped toward the horizon at Coral Cove, painting the sky in hues of amber and rose, as if the island itself were exhaling after days of secrets and storms. Miss Jane Marple stood on the resort's terrace, her shawl draped lightly over her shoulders, her eyes tracing the gentle curve of the beach where waves whispered their endless tales. The smuggling ring, led by Celeste Duval, Felix Montez, and Colonel Percival Wren, had been dismantled, their illicit artifacts seized by the authorities, and the resort had settled into a fragile calm. Her knitting bag, now lighter without the burden of clues, held only her needles and a skein of wool. The coded parchment, torn photograph, smudged napkin, and monogrammed handkerchief no longer needed. The cryptic note, "Beware, the one who paints with lies," had proven its worth, guiding her to Diego Salazar's tangled role, though he emerged not as a villain but a man caught in others' schemes. The day had been quiet, the guests blissfully unaware of the drama that had unfolded under their noses. Lady Beatrice, ever the gracious hostess, had organized a farewell dinner on the beach, a celebration to mark the end of the holiday season. Tables were laden with roasted fish, mango, salads, and pitchers of guava nectar, while a steel drum band played softly, their notes mingling with the evening breeze. Miss Marple, in a simple lavender dress, joined the gathering, her presence unassuming yet central to the island's restored peace. Beatrice, radiant in a turquoise gown, raised a glass to her friend. "Jane, you've been the soul of discretion, as always, but I swear there's a sparkle in your eye tonight. What have you been up to?" Miss Marple smiled, her fingers brushing the edge of her glass. "Merely enjoying your hospitality, dear. Coral Cove has its charms and its stories." The guests laughed and shared anecdotes, their voices free of the tension that had marked earlier days. Diego Salazar, now cleared of suspicion, sat quietly, sketching the sunset, his hands steadier than before. Miss Langley, her abalone pendant gleaming, chatted animatedly with a young couple, her earlier fears forgotten. The absence of Duval, Montez, and Wren was noted only in passing, their arrests attributed to a vague business dispute by the resort's staff, a story Miss Marple had quietly encouraged to maintain calm as the dinner progressed. A courier arrived, delivering a sealed envelope to Miss Marple. She opened it discreetly, finding a brief letter from the local police chief. "Your assistance was invaluable. The artifacts are secure, and the culprits face justice. Coral Cove owes you a debt." She tucked the letter away, her heart warmed by the acknowledgement, though she sought no credit. The island's tranquility was reward enough. After dessert a delicate coconut flan, Miss Marple strolled to the water's edge, where the tide lapped gently at her shoes. She reflected on the case. The coded message in the bottle had led her to the Sentinel's Cove, where Montez's exchange revealed the smuggling scope. The torn photograph and locket had hinted at Salazar's past, a red herring that masked his fear of exposure. The ledger and handkerchief had tied Montez to the operation, while the midnight note and peer confrontation sealed their fate. The coiled snake symbol, threading through every clue, had been the key, a mark of greed that bound the conspirators. Salazar approached, his sketchbook under his arm. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice soft, "I owe you thanks. I was reckless, painting things I shouldn't, but you saw the truth." "You're a man of talent, Mr. Salazar," she replied, her tone kind. "Use it wisely and let the past rest." He nodded, a weight lifting from his shoulders, and returned to the party. Miss Marple lingered, the sunset's glow fading to twilight. The mysteries of Coral Cove, the shipwreck's lost fortune, the locket's unknown man might linger, but they were no longer her concern. Justice had been served, the island's peace restored, and her holiday, though far from restful, was complete. Beatrice joined her, looping an arm through hers. "Jane, you're incorrigible. I invite you for a rest, and you unravel a scandal. Will you ever tell me the whole story?" Miss Marple chuckled, patting her friend's hand. "Some stories are best left to the waves, Beatrice." The next morning, she boarded the steamer back to the mainland, her suitcase light, her heart full. As Coral Cove receded into the distance, she gazed at the horizon, satisfied that every thread had been tied, every secret laid bare. The island's shadows had lifted, and Miss Marple, ever the quiet observer, sailed home, ready for whatever mystery awaited next.